I went in a completely different
Sure.
direction. So I went in the direction of something's removing brains, and but why are they removing the brains? So the inspiration for this actual video was another one where we did. It might have even been a character build, but we had a Warforged that we talked about, and like they were collecting brains for whatever reason, and I'm like, you know what, that would be a great red herring for a mind flayer campaign, right? Like for the players think, oh no, this mind flayer's doing it, but so I'm going with that, but even in a little bit of a different direction.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. All right, so what's on today's agenda?
Today's agenda is very similar to a series that we've done previously. Don't use this monster, use that monster, where that was like all about just substituting like really common, popular D&D monsters for other ones that could fulfill a similar role. But in this case, we're going to create red herrings where it's like, hey, this is the monster that the players are probably going to suspect and think you're using, but here's a way to kind of like throw them off the trail.
All right, so that's always a fun thing to be able to kind of get into this creative angle, to talk about red herrings and have this change so that people, they might, the player characters and players themselves might think it's one thing, but to go in another direction can be a lot of fun. And to have this, like where their suspicion gets raised and they're a little worried, especially if we're talking about what we're talking about, it could be a lot of fun.
Okay, so here's the setup. All right, probably in a very heavily populated area, large town or city, some kind of metropolis, there are murders happening, and the murders are very distinct. Bodies are being found, but they have no brains. That is the key element of, what these bodies all have in common. Maybe there's a lot of murders going on, but regardless, only some of them are missing their brains, no matter what actually killed them. So that is the red herring, and that is the thing that is going to probably lead the players to maybe believe it is illithids or mind flayers because something is eating the brains and completely cleaning out the brain cavity.
Now, obviously, if you're familiar with D&D, you know that mind flayers, illithids, are very powerful creatures. They come from the Underdark. They've got, loads of spells and magical abilities. They are a considerable threat, and if one of them is moving in on your town, your city, that could denote some serious incursion from the Underdark, and is just generally bad news.
It could generally be bad news. So, what is your red herring? How do you see this playing out in your game?
I wanted to kind of mirror the aspect of the way an illithid is usually, consuming its victim's brains, and it's got tentacles and it's got a beak, and it kind of comes in from the back, crushes the skull, and extracts the brain, is generally how I viewed and played the way the illithid, eats the brains. So I'm like, what's got a beak, what's got tentacles that could kind of mirror this aspect?
Is it a beak? Because I always thought of it more like a lamprey, where it's kind of like the circular mouth type thing, like the tentacles go in and wrap the skull to pull the head in to the lamp, and slurps it right out through the base of the skull.
I always viewed it as a beak because it's got to crush the skull. But I don't have it,
All right, so you got crushing, I got buzzsawing.
Sure. But it's however you want to play it in your game, in your world. That's how my mind flayers are.
How do mind flayers, illithids, do fine dining in your campaign?
So I wanted to mirror that aspect. So I was like, all right, well, what creatures might mimic that? Well, my first instinct was the Grick. They're a low CR, so you could really play that up at that, that first tier kind of play and make people really worried of like, wait a second, are we going up against a mind flayer? We're like level 2, level 3. This ain't cool. But maybe something has happened to the Grick. Maybe there is, similar to what you would need if it was a mind flayer, access to the Underdark, not too far away from wherever this is happening. But for some reason, something about these Grick, they've been infected by illithids, and you can eventually go down that trail. But they need whatever brain fluids people have, or maybe they're being, created to do this specific reason
Maybe they
for
just
some
like
other
it.
purpose. Maybe they like it, but they're consuming brains and leaving everything else, there and moving on. Maybe it makes it a lot harder to kind of track them because if you're expecting it's an illithid, you're looking for footprints and you're not going to find any because Grick are like snake-like and they, kind of slither and move that way.
Yeah, I mean, even in the wilds, in the real world, there are animals. I believe orca, they love shark livers, so they will flip sharks over and immobilize them, and then eat out their livers, and then just leave the
Leave them
rest
to
of
die.
them. Yeah, so that's very viable for that, and it could be like you said, whether it was introduced to them through another creature, like a mind flayer. If you wanted to actually use this as kind of like the foreshadowing, you totally do that. And like the red herring is, there is no red herring at the end of this campaign, or it could just be happenstance. One of them just so happens for whatever reason ate a brain one time and liked it, and just like that's all they want to eat now, and they don't even bother with the rest of it, especially when food sources are so plentiful. They don't have to eat this crud that they don't like, so
Right.
why not?
Do you want the premier cut of steak or do you want all the beef? Well, let me just get the premier cut and then I'll just go get another premier cut.
Yeah, and maybe it's smart enough, it's kind of figured out the patterns and where to hunt to do that. I went in a completely different direction. So I went in the direction of something's removing brains, and but why are they removing the brains? So the inspiration for this actual video was another one where we did. It might have even been a character build, but we had a Warforged that we talked about, and like they were collecting brains for whatever reason, and I'm like, you know what? That would be a great red herring for a mind flayer campaign, right? Like for the players think, oh no, this mind flayer's doing it. But so I'm going with that, but even in a little bit of a different direction. You have a mad scientist, crazy wizard type person who's doing it because they want to actually turn themselves into a brain in a jar and live forever because they think liches are icky and they don't want to be undead, even though a brain in a jar is technically undead. But they don't see it that way because it's their brain and it's still technically alive. They consider it, right? Whether it is or not is irrelevant. But they don't want to be the first test subject because you only get one shot at this. So they've been perfecting their method. And they're going out, and whether they're using minions to do it or they're doing it themselves, it could be that Warforged or it could be a completely different mad scientist type person. But they're choosing targets and they're extracting their brains and they're turning them into brains in a jar. Brain in a jar again is a fairly low CR monster. If they eventually track them down to their laboratory, they actually have a bunch of brains in a jar just there hanging out. And maybe they've done something to warp them and make them, the evil brains in a jar, antisocial, and now they're able to use them. But then I was thinking, like, it could make them the big bad by either, placing them inside of a shield guardian or some other golem type construct, where they're totally doing the Kang thing. Whether you want to put it in their stomach or on the head.
You mean Krang?
Krang, not Kang. Kang is Marvel. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is Krang. So doing the Krang thing, and also it just would make a beefier encounter. Imagine whether you use one of the various golems, depending on how strong you want the encounter, a beefed up brain in a jar, plus other brains in a jar. As the final counter.
Yeah, that would be really, really awesome. When you start kind of going through this, obviously that's a great projection there. But my brain goes in another direction of
with or without your body. Does it have a jar?
No. But when you're talking about someone extracting brains and having the red herring of the illithid, if you want to kind of have this thing that's again routed back to illithids, what if the one who's taking the brains is like a dark dwarf, a Dorgar artificer who's going to make the brains in a jar, still going that total route, but the essence is he's trying to get people to go into the Underdark and kill illithids because, you know, Duergar have that whole past of being slaves, and maybe he's never forgiven them for that, as well you shouldn't.
And also you're a dwarf, and dwarves generally hold grudges anyway.
So I think this could be a cool thing where it's like, all right, well, maybe they're, you know, the town or the city begins hiring upper level adventurers to go into the Underdark and kill illithids, and that's really what he's looking for. But it's like, you know, typical, you know, waste not, want not mentality. You know, this dwarf says, all right, well, let's do something with these brains. You know, so you know that could be a fun diversion of your aspect.
And there is another thing, and we might even do another video on this. I don't know. But you said Grick, and I was like, did he say Grick or Grell? Right? And I was thinking Grell because they look like brains, they with beaks and tentacles.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, what if in our world, Grick, the way they reproduce is they fertilize actual humanoid brains, and those brains like hatch into baby Grell, right? So they actually have to find humanoids, extract their brains, and then they bring them back, and they have a little nest of like brains all stacked together like eggs, and then they have to fertilize them, and also if you were to do that, it would kind of make Grell like asexual as well. Then you could have them hatch into baby, and it would just be really weird and creepy. But that sprung to mind as well.
You could also go with like a whole metamorphosis angle, you know, where like they consume a number of brains, and they begin and they go through this, you know, egg-like, you know, phase of their life again and become Grell. And it's a whole thing that you could possibly do.
So there's a bunch of ideas for you to use the red herrings of the illithid.
But hey, you like this video, others like it, as well as all the great content you can find over at nerdarchy.com. Why not come check us out on Patreon and support us over there?
Articles like new 5e D&D monsters from Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Another great way to help out Nerdarchy is to check out Nerdarchy the Store. Great products like the Lord of Dead Dreams. Within these pages, you'll find threats from wild places where the Fae come from. Not all Fae are nice and playful. Some thrive on dark dreams and nightmares. Heroes face off against one such villain who revels in ripping the dream essence from mortals. Included within is new magic item, Dream Essence, 2 new creatures including Jaris, the Lord of Dead Dreams, the Onibara Ambush Adventure for 4 characters of 5th level.
So let us know what you think down in the comments below. What red herrings would you use in your games to allude to that it's an illithid, but use something else instead?
While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, click on that notification bell. You know you want to.
Quick reminder, we drop new videos here on the channel a couple times a week, so come on back. But you can't wait till then? No worries, we got you covered. You can check out D&D Monsters. What kind of pet would a mind flayer make?
So until next time, stay nerdy.